I'm going to show you how to post on the Fallible Ideas discussion list. If you haven't already signed up, go to this address. This is the page. It'll walk you through it. I'm going to assume you already did that. I'm going to show you how to post both on Gmail and Apple Mail. Gmail is on the left, Apple Mail is on the right. Gmail should work for anybody. Apple Mail is Mac specific. When you post, you want to make sure your posts are going to this address, fallible-ideas@googlegroups.com. So I'm going to open up an existing Fallible Ideas thread in Gmail. Now the first thing is, when you click reply, you want to make sure that you don't top post. Top post would mean replying here at the top. By default, the content from the post you're replying to in Gmail is hidden. And so if you sent your reply like this, your new content would be at the top of the previous content. So I'm going to expand where it says show trimmed content here, these three little dots. So when you post, you don't want to post up here. Instead, you want to post after the content that you're replying to, either at the bottom, or if you're doing a more detailed reply, after a paragraph. Now, where you start replying will depend on how detailed your reply is, whether you're going paragraph by paragraph, or whether you're just giving a general reply at the bottom. But in either case, you always want your reply to be coming after the content you're replying to, and not before. If you reply at the top, and other people are replying at the bottom, like they're supposed to, then the post is going to become a confusing mess. One thing I really want to emphasize with Gmail is that when you click reply, it kind of pushes you to top post. It's hiding the previous content, and it expects you to start replying above that. So you do have to really remember to show trim content, to scroll down, and to start replying at the bottom. You can't just go with the flow. You have to override the default here. Now regarding top posting, the same principle applies in Apple Mail. If you reply to an email, you don't want to reply up here. Instead, you want to reply down here. For posting on FI list, we use plain text, so don't send HTML. It doesn't work correctly and it breaks quoting. For Gmail, you want to make sure you're in plain text mode. So how you do that is, when you reply to an email, you click on these three vertical dots on the lower right, and if you're in plain text mode, there'll be a check mark like you see here. If you're not in plain text mode, you want to make sure that you change it to that. Now for Apple Mail, there's a couple things. The first thing is you want to go to Mail, Preferences, the Composing tab, and then you want to make sure that your message format under Composing is in plain text. Then for individual emails, when you have an individual email open for a reply, you can go to Format, and if you're in plain text mode, then it'll say make rich text because you're in plain text mode already. And if you're not in plain text mode, then it'll give you option to switch over to plain text mode, and you definitely want to do that. But if it says make rich text already, then you should be alright. So now we're going to talk about quoting. Most posters use software with color quotation levels, like you see on the right here in Apple Mail. We want posts to look okay for posters using that kind of software. That feature helps readability. It makes it easier to see who said what. But for it to work correctly, you have to format your posts correctly. And the use of quoting is not just something that applies to people's prior messages on the list. The same goes for quoting books or articles. If you're pasting a quotation from a book or an article, or any outside source, you want to make sure it's quoted properly. And now I'm going to talk about some of the details of doing that. So suppose I want to talk about a quote from Ayn Rand. Here's a page with a quote from Galt's speech in one of Ayn Rand's books. So I'm going to open a new email in Apple Mail. Make sure that it's going to the Google group. Give it a subject. and say where the quote is coming from in the body of the email too. Select the text, copy it, paste it in. Now, when you want to indicate what text you want to add the quote level to, you can either select the text, and that can be useful if you have multiple paragraphs that you're adding quote level to, or if it's just one paragraph like here, then as long as the cursor is somewhere on the paragraph, then it'll work. I'm going to select the text just for the sake of clarity of what we're adding the quote level to. Now there's a couple ways you can add the quote level. I think the easiest way is to use the shortcut, which is Command apostrophe. And if you need to add another quote level, you can just hit Command apostrophe again. Now another way to add quote levels is to go to Format, Quote Level, and you can increase and you can decrease. And you see there's a shortcut for decreasing as well. You also want to quote stuff properly when using Gmail. The way you do it is a little different. So let's say we want to also create a new email here. So let's go into the Google group. Now, make sure, like we mentioned earlier, that you're in plain text mode. So if you want to add a quote, the way you do it is you put a greater than sign at the beginning of your paragraph. And if you want to quote more material, if you have multiple paragraphs, this happens to be from the same source, so then make sure you're adding a greater than sign for each paragraph that you're quoting. So suppose you write your post, but then you're concerned, you're not sure about your quote formatting. You're not sure how it's going to look. One thing you can do is paste into a markdown editor. And I've put the address of a free one on the web up here. So you go here, you write your post, you copy it, you paste it in, and then you can see what it's going to look like. Now, I wouldn't recommend composing in this because their block quote tool doesn't work correctly, but once you've composed a reply in Apple Mail or whatever you're using, you can at least check it using this site. So, giving an attribution is when you give information about the source of some text or idea. So, here we see an attribution of this quote, and this is telling us where we can find this quote. These are all attributions of the content that's being quoted on this post from prior messages on the list. Now, failing to give a proper attribution is misleading to people about who said what. And it's confusing and it wastes people's time because then they got to try and figure it out because the attributions have gotten screwed up. And good attributions are helpful because they help curious people more easily find information about what's being discussed. Now, attributions are quoted one less level than the material that the attribution corresponds to. That might sound kind of confusing in the abstract, but it should make sense after I demonstrate it a little bit. So again, this is an easy case. Let's look at this quote from Galt's speech. The attribution itself has no quote level. It's just in regular black text. There's no coloring. There's no line here on the left side. And then the actual quoted material has one quote level. It's colored and there's one line here on the left side. So this is an example of the attribution being quoted one less level. Now, the first time that you look at a post like the post on the right here that has a ton of quoting, you might get a little confused. But that's fine. Just keep the same basic idea in mind. So looking at this quote, we see a lot of attribution lines. So let's analyze, and let's keep in mind that the attribution is quoted one less level than the quoted material. So let's start with this attribution to gist. He's got no quote coloring, and his material is the purple stuff down here. And this attribution in purple to Elliot is quoted one less level than this material here in blue. So that's what that corresponds to. Now notice we're not just matching up the same colors. That's not what we're doing. We're looking for what's one level less than the quoted material. Now, one thing you notice as we're looking at this post, or one thing that you might have noticed, is that we don't see an attribution line in the body of the email for the most recent in-time poster, who's anonymous in this case. And one way to think of it is basically like when we reply, that'll get added by the software, but when you're looking at this email, you can think of their attribution line almost as being in the from as opposed to in the body. Like you see here, this is the email, it's from anonymous. So it's not in the body yet. So now let's reply. And you'll notice that it added an attribution line automatically for anonymous. However, there is a bug in how it did this, and it's actually a pretty important bug to be aware of. It's not quoted correctly. So it did add the attribution line, but it's putting both anonymous and gist on the same level of quote, which goes very much against what we were just discussing. So we want to fix that, and that's pretty easy. You can just put the cursor at the beginning of where this line is here in backspace, and that's fixed. And you do want to, it's very easy to do, but you do want to remember to do it, or else it's a misattribution. So Gmail's a similar idea regarding attributions. So we have a new post, a subject, then we want to put an attribution in the body of the email, and then quote it using the greater than sign at the beginning of a paragraph. And now this is properly attributed. Stuff with the wrong attribution is misquoted. So like if we reply to an email using Apple Mail, say, and we didn't correct this problem at the beginning of the email with the two attribution lines being at the same quote level, this would be a misattribution. Posting stuff without attribution is just, it's a failure to give a proper citation. It's confusing. Like if I just, an example of that would be if I didn't, using Gmail, if I didn't say where this quote was from, and I was just like, oh, nice quote, and then have this in here, no context, people don't know why I'm quoting it or where it's from. So don't do that. Always say where something is coming from. So if you're applying to a post and you want to remove some material because it's not relevant to your post, that's fine. But if you are using material, don't remove the attribution from it. Be careful. Make sure that for all the material that you're quoting, there's one of these attribution lines up here that correspond to it that tell the reader where it came from. Be particularly careful in a situation where there's a very big thread with lots of sprawling discussion and people replying paragraph by paragraph. In such a case, if you want to remove material because it's not relevant anymore, that's fine, but it can be very easy to miss the fact that you need an attribution because there's like so many layers of stuff. So be extra careful when dealing with long, convoluted threads. Generally, as a general principle, you want to delete content that's not relevant to your post and keep content that's relevant to what your post is discussing. You got to use your judgment, err on the side of inclusion. If you're new, it can be a little hard to judge. There are easy cases though, and I'll show you one right here. This stuff at the bottom, this footer stuff, and things like people's signatures, those are not relevant to your post. So you just get rid of those, say your thing, and then send it off. So some big picture principles. People like easy to read, simple, short posts. It's best to have one section of new content in your posts, quote whatever you need, and then put your new content at the bottom. And this post is just a really good example. You see there's a bunch of stuff up here, but then Elliot's actual reply is pretty short and to the point. Now, if you have lots to say about a post, if you have many points to make, that's great. Try replying to the same email multiple times instead of writing a really long single post. It's good to have one main idea per email. So now the group isn't moderated, so use your own best judgment about things like making sure your posts are properly formatted, that the material in your post is actually relevant. We're relying on you, so keep that in mind. So the posting norms that we follow, that you've been learning some about in this video, they go a long ways back, and they stood the test of time. They're not arbitrary. We think they're best for handling certain issues. Other options do a bad job of showing things like quote history going way back. What we do does a pretty good job. If you make a posting error, don't panic. Nobody's going to get banned for an innocent mistake, but do put your best effort to figure out what went wrong so you can prevent it from happening again. And also feel free to ask questions about how to post on the list. That's a welcome topic. So if you have trouble, just ask and have fun.